where the predatory smile meets the all-seeing eye. A drama begins that is older than memory. It is not merely an encounter of two individuals, but the collision of archetypes. The trickster who bends light into distortion, and the mirror who dares to reflect without flinching. Do not mistake this for coincidence. In the dark geometry of the psyche, such meetings are ordained, as if the gods themselves demanded a confrontation between illusion and perception. The narcissist does not simply wear a mask. He is a mask. His face is not a countenance, but a fortress. Every smile sharpened into a blade. Every gesture an invisible leash. Behind the radiance of charm trembles a child exiled into the catacombs of shame. Once, long ago, that child reached for tenderness and received a conditional caress. You're loved if was the hammer that split the unity of the self. From its fragments the mask was forged. Protector, tyrant, seducer, one and the same. The empath, by contrast, is not armed with weapons, but with an unbearable sensitivity. She does not see merely surfaces. She hears the tremor in the pause, the faint tightening around the eyes, the sigh lodged between syllables. Where others are enchanted by the narcissist's performance, she listens to the machinery behind the music. Compassion is her gift, but also her curse. For compassion unguided becomes a sacrificial altar on which she lays herself down. Yet something unprecedented occurs. The mirror, polished for years by pain, begins to cut. She has studied the grammar of wounds, the syntax of shadows, the secret alphabet of hunger. She does not retaliate with cruelty. Rather, she perceives with clarity. And clarity, to the masked one, is more lethal than hostility. For hostility can be fought charmed or subdued, but clarity dismantles the very stage on which the mask performs. This is why the narcissist recoils at her gaze. He does not fear her judgment, but her vision. To be seen without costume is to feel naked in the amphitheater of the world. His smile stiffens into terror, for he realizes that the very ground is power. The control of appearances is slipping. Here, Nietzsche's whisper becomes thunder. Where love is blind, the will to power feasts. But where love learns to see, the feast is ended. Understand, this is not the tale of victim and oppressor. It is a ritual rupture, a sacred fissure in the unconscious. The empath ceases to be merely the vessel of sacrifice and becomes instead a sovereign witness. She no longer bleeds willingly into his chalice. She stands, still and lucid, and in her stillness the entire masquerade shudders. The mask, confronted by the eye that will not close, begins to tremble, and trembling is the beginning of truth. The narcissist speaks a tongue that was never taught in schools. It is a dialect forged not of words but of silences, evasions, and shimmering half-truths. Every compliment is a coin with hidden debt. Every pause is a trapdoor. Every tenderness is laced with the tax of obedience. To the untrained, this language is invisible, felt only as unease or confusion. But the empath, through a slow and painful apprenticeship, has begun to hear the grammar of the wound. She perceives that the masked senses are not proclamations, but defenses. Grandiosity is not expansion, but contraction. Charm is not generosity, but a barricade disguised as a feast. The narcissist is not free, but endlessly occupied by the war, to conceal the trembling child beneath the armor. Each gesture, each glance, each tightening of the jaw is a hieroglyph of fear. The empath deciphers the script. Here is where he dreads abandonment. Here is where the echo of shame cracks his voice. Here is where he hungers, not for love, but for anesthesia against a void. To know this alphabet is to hold power. And here begins the great danger. For knowledge does not remain pure. It tempts. Once you learn which strings are tied to which shadows, you may be tempted to pluck them. The empath feels for the first time the seductive intoxication of the magician. If I press here, he will kneel. If I mirror this wound, he will shatter. If I withhold, he will crawl back in desperation. The sorcery of perception threatens to become the sorcery of domination. Nietzsche warned. He who fights with monsters should see to it that he himself does not become a monster. This is no abstraction here. It is a living temptation in the empath's veins. To understand the wound of another is to hold the keys to their cage. But what is one to do with such keys? Unlock the bars in compassion, or rattle them in cruelty. The line between healer and manipulator is as thin as a shadow on stone. The empath tests her newfound strength. Where once you responded with instinctive guilt, she now pauses. When accused, she no longer rushes to self-erase. When offered conditional love, she unwraps it like a poisoned gift and sets aside. Her silence becomes a new language, a refusal to dance the old choreography. And in that silence, the mask begins to fracture. The narcissist feels the shift like a blade under the skin. His smile grows sharper, then falters. He deploys his arsenal. Charm, pity, rage, but each strike finds no purchase. The empath's heart has become mirror smooth, the hooks sliding away. What was once a banquet or energy is now famine. And famine terrifies him more than any confrontation. But the empath must tread carefully. To speak the language of wounds without being consumed by it requires the discipline of a sage. The temptation of the magician is always near. To revel in control, to wield knowledge as weapon, to taste the forbidden sweetness of power. If she succumbs, she becomes a very mask she has unveiled. Thus she learns a paradox. True mastery lies not in domination, but in clarity. To see the wound without exploiting it. To speak the language of shadows without wearing the mask of shadows. To wield silence as presence, not as punishment. And in this discipline, she discovers something greater. The realization that his language was never entirely foreign. The wounds she deciphers in him are echoes of her own. The hunger for approval, the fear of abandonment, the compulsion to give until empty. All these are glyphs written also in her flesh. By learning his alphabet, she begins to read her own. Here the eye that sees all turns inward, and in that turning, the true work begins. In the desert of the spirit, Nietzsche spoke of three metamorphoses: the camel that bears burdens, the lion that roars for freedom, and the child who creates new worlds. The empath has walked this desert many times without knowing it. She began as a camel, laden with musts and shoulds, staggering beneath obligations that were never hers to carry. You must forgive endlessly. You must sacrifice. You must endure. You must love even when unloved. She thought this was virtue, but it was slavery draped in sanctity. Then, in the heat of awakening, the lion roared within her. The lion is no servant. It smashes chains and spits out commandments. It says, "No more. I will not bow. I will not bleed. I will not be the chalice of your thirst." This roar shakes the throne of a narcissist, for he rules not by force, but by the compliance of those who bow. When the empath rises in refusal, the throne trembles like sand in the wind. Yet the lion alone cannot complete the transformation. The lion destroys, but does not create. It tears down the false temple, but leaves only ruins. The true metamorphosis is still to come. For after the lion comes a child, not childish, but childlike, innocent, playful, free. The child does not roar, it sings. The child does not carry burdens, it dances. The child does not seek thrones or hierarchies. It invents games where hierarchies dissolve like snowflakes in the palm. The narcissist cannot comprehend the child. His world is built on vertical scales, above and below, superior and inferior. But the child plays in circles, where no position dominates. She says, "I am not your enemy, nor your subject, nor your rescuer. I am a sovereign game unto myself." In that moment, the throne of sand collapses. For what is a throne without an audience, without worshippers, without the bowed head of the camel? The narcissist, deprived of a stage, finds that his crown weighs nothing. His scepter points nowhere. But beware, the child's game is not naive. It is not blind to manipulation. Rather, it is free from the compulsion to answer it. The child looks at the poisoned gift and laughs, not in scorn but in lightness, and sets it aside. Where the camel once carried the load, and the lion once smashed the chains. The child simply refuses to pick them up. She is no longer compelled to rescue the wounded tyrant, nor to destroy him. She walks her own path, singing her own song. And here lies the quiet revolution. Power no longer belongs to the one who commands, nor to the one who resists, but to the one who creates. Creation is the final liberation, for the creator is to step outside the entire theater of domination. The narcissist thrives on opposition, on the polarity of master and slave, controller and controlled. But creation plays elsewhere. The empath turned child is no longer a character in his play. She has walked off stage and begun writing her own script in the open sky. This is a true throne, not of sand, not of gold, but of breath. The throne that no one can topple because it exists only within, in her playfulness. The empath has reclaimed something greater than vengeance or victory. She has reclaimed her origin, the freedom to be without justification. And in that freedom, the lion rests, the camel vanishes, the child laughs, and the world begins anew. Nietzsche warned, "He who fights with monsters should take care lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss gazes also into you." The empath, standing at the threshold of her awakening, now feels the heat of this warning. For in unveiling the narcissist's wound, she has begun to glimpse her own reflection. The abyss she has studied is not entirely his. It speaks also of her. When she leans over the edge, she sees not his distorted grin, but her own hidden hunger, the hunger to be indispensable. Was not her endless giving also a strategy of power? Was not her sacrifice a way of controlling rejection, of ensuring her place by becoming too necessary to abandon? The camel who once bore burdens disguised her will to power in the costume of virtue. The lion who roared, "I will not serve," risked roaring also, "I will dominate." The abyss reveals that her purity was never pure, her love never without shadow. And here begins the most difficult labor, to acknowledge the monster within, to see that self-sacrifice can be as manipulative as self-aggrandizement, to admit that compassion, unguided by clarity, can enslave as surely as cruelty. This recognition does not destroy her. It purifies her. For to see the monster within is to rob it of its secrecy. What hides in the dark commands us. What is named in the light loses its tyranny. The narcissist sought mastery through illusion. The empath, too, once sought mastery through martyrdom. Both were masks. But now she has chosen another craft, clarity. Clarity is not a weapon, not a spell, not a roar. It is a discipline. It is the art of perceiving without being possessed. It is a practice of silence that does not submit, and a speech that does not manipulate. Clarity is harder than love, harder than hate. Love can seduce, hate can intoxicate, but clarity requires solitude. It demands standing before the trembling child within and saying, "I see you. I will not trade you for approval. I will not disguise you as virtue. I will not abandon you in the name of sacrifice." This is a true abyss gaze, not into the other, but into oneself. When she returns to the dance with the narcissist, she no longer steps blindly. She sees the hooks before they are cast. She senses the tightening of breath, the storm forming behind his eyes, the sudden sweetness masking the net. She sees, and she does not react. Her calm is not coldness, it is sovereignty. And to the narcissist, this calm is unbearable, for his empire is built on reaction. Without her guilt, without her compliance, his weapons fall like swords into sand. But clarity is not triumph. It is not a crown to wear. It is a craft, a daily chiseling of perception, a continual choice to remain awake. The temptation of the magician still lingers, to use his fluency in wounds as an instrument of control. Yet she knows now that to do so would be to enter the abyss not as witness, but as inhabitant, and she has seen too much to choose that fate. So she practices clarity like an artisan practices his tools. Each pause is a chisel. Each silence is a brushstroke. Each refusal is a thread woven into the tapestry of freedom. And in this craft she discovers that liberation is not a single event but a rhythm. the rhythm of living unbound again and again in every encounter. Thus, the empath steps away from both mask and abyss, not untouched, but transformed. She carries within her the memory of the monster and the courage to meet it. And with this memory, she walks the narrow path where neither domination nor martyrdom can seduce her. This path has no audience, no throne, no applause, but has something greater, the clarity of one who sees, and in seeing remains whole. Deep within the labyrinth of the narcissist's psyche lies a chamber sealed by centuries of silence. Few have approached its door, and fewer still dare to enter. It is guarded not by monsters of flesh, but by masks upon masks, each one crafted to repel intimacy. Yet when the empath learns the secret grammar of his wounds, she is led past these guardians, unnoticed, as if she were a ghost walking through gates thought impassable. And what does she find there? Not a tyrant upon a throne, but a child, trembling, neglected, ashamed. The child is the first victim, the first exile, the first true self-abandoned. His voice, once silenced by ridicule, whispers still, "Am I worthy? Am I enough?" But no one answers. Instead, the adult mask answers for him, roaring grandiosity, demanding recognition, consuming admiration like bread against starvation. The empath, upon seeing this child, feels both compassion and dread. Compassion, for here is the origin of cruelty, not malice, but injury. Dread, for here also lies a temptation, to cradle this child as her own, to believe she can heal what only he himself can reclaim. This is the paradox of seeing. To perceive the wound is to feel its gravity. To resist the pull requires a strength rarer than love. For love, when blind, becomes enslavement, but sight, when clear, becomes liberation. The empath must say, "I see you're wound, but I will not make it my altar. I see your child, but I will not adopt it as my own. I see your hunger, but I will not bleed to feed it." This refusal is not cruelty. It is clarity dressed in compassion. To refuse to save another's child is to allow the child the dignity of its own awakening. The narcissist, confronted by such sight, quakes as though stripped naked. His empire is built upon the manipulation of perception. To be seen beneath the mask is to feel annihilated. Rage rises in him like fire. How dare you see me? How dare you pierce the veil I have woven with such care? Yet, beneath the rage, another current stirs, fascination. For in her gaze he finds what he has longed for but never admitted. Someone who does not recoil. Someone who touches the rawness without flinching. This paradox is unbearable. To be both terrified and drawn in, to long for the gaze that one cannot endure. Thus the narcissist oscillates. He will draw her close, then push her violently away. He will confess, then retract. He will show the child, then slam the door. It is not malice, but reflex, the psyche's instinct to protect what is most fragile. For the empath, this oscillation is a crucible. It teaches her that seeing does not mean saving, and understanding does not mean surrender. To hold the paradox without collapsing into either pity or rage. This is her initiation. She must learn to stand as witness, not rescuer, as mirror, not mask. And here she discovers a deeper truth. The narcissist is not only an adversary, but also a messenger. By forcing her to confront his wound, he has also forced her to confront her own by pulling her into the chamber of his abandoned child. He has revealed the chamber of hers, and thus begins the alchemy of the encounter. In seeing him, she begins to see herself. This is why the meeting of predators smile. An all-seeing eye is not a trivial skirmish, but a mythic ordeal. For in that chamber, the empath does not merely see him. She awakens to the realization that every gaze into another's abyss is also a gaze into her own. And so she learns to stand steady and silent before the child, his and hers alike, and to whisper the words that end the ancient spell, "I see you, I will not abandon you, but I will not lose myself to save you." Jung spoke of the coniunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites, as the secret work of the psyche. Light and shadow, love and power, compassion and cruelty. None exist without their mirror. And here, in the tense encounter between empath and narcissist, the union takes on flesh. The empath believes herself pure, giver, healer, vessel of light. The narcissist seemed pure in another sense, predator, consumer, vessel of hunger. But awakening reveals the falsity of such purity. For the empath's giving was not free of shadow. It was born of her own fear of abandonment, her own hunger to be needed. And the narcissist's hunger was not pure malice. It was the desperate cry of an abandoned child. Each was a mirror of the other's hidden truth. Thus the union begins, not in romance or reconciliation, but in recognition. The empath, learning his language, perceives that the wound she reads in him is etched also in herself. Her compulsive giving is a distortion no less than his compulsive taking. Both are masks, crafted differently, but masks nonetheless. She sees at last that she did not stumble into his orbit by accident. She was drawn by resonance, by the magnetic call of unfinished work within her. Here the dance shifts. The empath no longer seeks merely to decode him. She turns inward, deciphering her own alphabet of wounds. Why did she tolerate what her soul knew was poison? Why did she call sacrifice love? Why did she believe that devotion without boundary was virtue rather than bondage? To ask these questions is to turn the mirror inward and to feel its cold clarity cut through illusion. And what does she find there? Not innocence, but shadow. Not purity, but contradiction. She finds that she too has an abyss, though its shape is different. She has not built walls of arrogance, but altars of self-denial. She has not cloaked herself in grandeur, but in service. Yet both disguises arise from the same source. The fear of being unloved, unseen, abandoned. The empath who learns this does not fall into despair. She awakens. For only when the shadow is admitted can wholeness begin. To reject the shadow is to remain enslaved by it. To embrace it is to integrate. This is individuation, the slow, painful work of weaving light and dark into a single tapestry. And so, when she next looks at the narcissist, she sees not only a tormentor, but also a teacher, an unwilling one, perhaps, but a teacher nonetheless. He has forced her to confront what she would not have faced alone. His mask has mirrored her own. His hunger has exposed her compulsion. He has dragged her, unwillingly, into the chamber of her own soul. This does not mean she must remain. Awakening is not bondage. The union of opposites does not demand eternal entanglement with the one who wounded her. It demands only the recognition that the outer drama reflects the inner. Once seen, the spell is broken. The contract dissolves. The empath no longer plays her role unconsciously, no longer supplies the stage with her blood. She becomes lucid, awake inside the dream. And in that lucidity, something shifts. The narcissist, once the master of play, now finds his lines falling flat. His seductions ring hollow. His threats echo into silence. For he is no longer speaking to the camel who obeyed, nor to the lion who fought, but to the child who plays outside the script. His empire of shadows loses its gravity, for she no longer orbits it. This is a union of opposites, not the fusion of victim and tyrant, but the recognition that both were masks of the same archetypal wound. In her clarity, she holds both in balance, the compassion that sees the suffering and the strength that refuses to be consumed by it. She no longer denies the shadow, nor does she worship it. She holds it, as one holds a mirror, and in that reflection she sees herself whole. Thus she becomes not merely empath, not merely survivor, but something rarer, the one who has seen both light and dark, and chosen to stand in the truth of both. Before the conscious mind awakens, the unconscious rehearses in dreams. It whispers in symbols what the tongue cannot yet pronounce. Thus the empath's transformation does not arrive first in waking life, but in the theater of night. There she finds herself wandering strange landscapes, vast marketplaces where every stall offers riddles instead of wares, mirror-filled halls where her face shifts into countless masks, some radiant, some monstrous, some indistinguishable from the narcissist. At first she recoils. To see her own reflection wearing his grin is unbearable. She wants to smash the glass, to banish the likeness, but the dream insists, do not turn away, stand and see. And when she finally steadies her gaze, something astonishing occurs. The mirrors dissolve. She finds herself standing in a field under an open sky, the air clearer than any she has known. The labyrinth is gone. She has not escaped it. She has transcended it, for the map of its corridors now lives within her, and what is mapped no longer enslaves. This is the nature of thresholds. Once crossed, they cannot be uncrossed. Once the architecture of illusion is seen, no paint can hide its cracks. Once the language of wounds is learned, silence itself speaks. To awaken is to become incapable of pretending, and this incapacity is both liberation and burden. For while others still dance unknowing in the narcissist theater, she sees the strings, the masks, the stage lights. She cannot unsee. The narcissist feels this shift with primal dread. His empire depends not on truth, but on perception, not on substance, but on control of the gaze. And now, he senses that her gaze no longer bends. She does not fight him, nor worship him, nor collapse under his storms. She simply sees. And to one who survives by illusion, being seen is annihilation. Thus begins a spiral. Charm sharpened into mockery, seduction poisoned into guilt, rage disguised as righteous grievance. He scrambles to reassert dominance, but each tactic fails where once it succeeded. The hooks slide off smooth skin. The storms break against a mountain unmoved. His terror grows not because she resists, but because she no longer plays. His theater has lost its audience, and a king without spectators is only a man in costume. Yet the empath, though freer than ever, now confronts her own peril. To see too much is to risk contempt. To decode every gesture, to anticipate every manipulation, can curdle into cynicism. Here she must guard her heart, lest vision harden into arrogance. For the true danger of awakening is not falling back into bondage, but becoming enslaved by superiority. The belief that seeing absolves her of humility. Therefore the threshold demands balance. She must wield her vision not as weapon, but as compass, not to dominate, but to discern. Silence becomes her ally, not the silence of suppression, but the silence of sovereignty. To answer only when chosen, to engage only when true, to stand in stillness that no storm can uproot. This is the discipline of the awakened, and in this silence lies a deeper mystery. For silence is the most untranslatable language. The narcissist cannot bear it, for silence is refusal. Silence is boundary. Silence is a collapse of the old contract. To him, silence is absence, but to her, silence is presence, the presence of self-reclaimed, the ground beneath her feet solid at last. Thus the dream reveals itself as prophecy. The labyrinth was never meant to be destroyed, only understood. The masks were never meant to be smashed, only seen. And once seen, the spell is broken forever. This is the irreversible vision. It cannot be unlearned, cannot be undone. The empath, once captive, is now sovereign. She carries within her the key, not to his prison, but to her own. And that, perhaps, is the truest miracle. The encounter with illusion becomes a midwife of authenticity. The abyss she gazed into now gazes back not with menace, but with recognition. She has crossed the threshold, and there is no return. When the empath stands beyond the threshold, a strange stillness descends. It is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of reclaimed ground, the hush after a storm that once seemed eternal. This silence is unbearable to the narcissist. For him, silence is not neutrality. It is rebellion. It is exile. It is a collapse of the stage upon which he played the sovereign. Once, every gesture from him evoked a reaction. His sigh drew her apology, his frown her explanation, his rage her surrender. But now his gestures fall into an abyss that does not echo. His arsenal, charm, guilt, flattery, fury, discharges into the void. To him, This void feels like annihilation. To her, it feels like air. Here the archetype of the magician awakens. For to learn another secret language, to see through the veils, is to hold an instrument of immense power. The empath now knows how to wound without raising a hand, how to unravel a performance with a glance, how to unmask him with a silence. The temptation whispers, why not use this knowledge? Why not savor the reversal? Why not taste the power once denied to you? This is a magician's shadow, seduction and control disguised as wisdom, and it is perhaps the greatest danger of all. For the delight in such mastery is to become what one has resisted. The empath, if she succumbs, would not destroy the mask but inherit it, wearing it with the same hunger it was once forged to conceal. Nietzsche would warn here, beware, lest in defeating the dragon you become the dragon. Jung would echo, to integrate the shadow is not to identify with it. The line is perilously thin. To know the language of the abyss is not to inhabit it. To hold the power of the magician is not to cast spells upon the unknowing. Thus the empath learns restraint. True sovereignty is not the intoxication of power, but the refusal of it. To speak the shadow's tongue only when necessary, and never for vanity. To see manipulation without becoming manipulator. To answer silence with silence, not as punishment, but as boundary. In this refusal lies the highest form of strength. Strength that does not need to display itself. The narcissist, sensing this shift, panics. He may lash out with desperate rage or offer sudden sweetness, or stage grand gestures of contrition. He does not do this out of change, but out of survival. His fortress, built from years of masks, feels a quake of collapse. Yet whether he crumbles or not is not her concern, for she has understood at last. Liberation is not about his transformation, but about her own, and so the silence remains. Deep, steady, unyielding. A silence that does not plead, does not accuse, does not explain. This silence is the music of sovereignty, the anthem of one who has ceased to barter her essence for belonging. To the narcissist, it is the most alien language, for it cannot be manipulated. To the empath, it is the voice of the self, the ground of her becoming. Here lies the final paradox. By learning the language of the narcissist, she has uncovered not the key to his prison, but the key to her own. She does not wield it to unlock his cage. That is his work. Should he ever dare, she wields it to step out of hers and into the clear air of her own life. The magician's temptation will always whisper, to turn vision into weapon, to make knowledge into dominion. But she knows now that true mastery is not in domination, but in clarity. To see without being consumed, to hold power without being bound to it, to stand in silence and let the storm pass untouched. And so she walks forward, leaving behind the theater of illusions, carrying not victory, not revenge, but something far greater, the unshakable presence of one who has become whole. Every theater ends not with applause, but with silence. Curtains fall, lights dim, the audience departs, and the stage is revealed for what it always was: planks of wood, fabric, rope. So, too, with the narcissist theater. Once the empath withdraws her participation, once she ceases to answer the cues, the grand play collapses into hollowness. The narcissist may still perform familiar roles: the lover, the martyr, the conqueror, the judge. But his words fall flat, as though spoken into a room emptied of echoes. For what is manipulation without response? What is control without compliance? A puppet master who holds limp strings commands nothing. This dissolution is not a dramatic battle. There is no thunderclap of triumph, no fiery confrontation. The ending is quieter, stranger, more unsettling. It is absence. It is the empath no longer flinching, no longer negotiating, no longer tethered by the invisible contracts that once bound her heart. It is her stillness that ends a drama, not her struggle. To him, this stillness is unbearable. He may accuse her of being cold, unfeeling, transformed for the worse. He will say she has changed, and he is right. But what he perceives as coldness is clarity. What he calls indifference is sovereignty. She is no longer a character in his script. She has become author of her own. For the empath, this dissolution is both liberation and grief. To awaken is to lose the dream, even if the dream was a nightmare. She must release the fantasy that love could redeem him, that devotion could rewrite his wound, that her sacrifice could heal what he himself refuses to face. She grieves not only for him, but for the part of herself that clung to the illusion. Yet from this grief arises a new rhythm. Relationships no longer revolve around appeasement or rescue. The empath begins to sense in others the subtle masks they wear, the wounds they conceal. But she no longer rushes to heal or to save. Her vision no longer compels her to servitude. Instead, it guides her into the summit. This belongs to me. This does not. This I will carry. This I will leave. This is sovereignty. Not isolation, not superiority, but centeredness. The sovereign self does not need to dominate, nor to submit. It simply stands, grounded in its own gravity. The narcissist, deprived of his gravitational pull, drifts elsewhere in search of new mirrors, new audiences, new sacrifices. His drama continues, but not with her. And she walks into a quieter world. A world where her nervous system is no longer tuned to anticipate his storms. A world where silence is not punishment, but peace. A world where relationships can be entered freely without compulsion, without debt. Nietzsche once wrote, "The greatest privilege of a lifetime is to become who you are." This privilege is earned in the dissolution of illusions. For the empath, becoming who she is meant shedding the masks she wore as surely as he did. She was never merely the healer, nor merely the victim. She was always something deeper, a presence capable of seeing, of naming, of integrating both shadow and light. Thus the drama ends not in victory, nor in defeat, but in transformation. The narcissist loses a stage. The empath finds her ground. And from that ground she steps forward, not as mirror, not as mask, but as self-sovereign, whole, unbound. Even when the theater has ended, echoes remain. Old patterns whisper like ghosts in forgotten corridors. A tone of voice may stir the memory of past commands. A sudden silence may awaken the reflex of guilt. These are not new chains, but the shadows of chains already broken. The empath feels them, recognizes them, and lets them pass. For she knows now, recognition is liberation. To see the echo as echo is to rob it of power. Dreams, too, carry these remnants. She may find herself again in a mirror hall, but this time the mirrors are faint, translucent, dissolving like mist. Sometimes she dreams of the narcissist standing on a distant shore, calling out words she cannot quite hear. The sound fades before it reaches her. The dream is not a warning, but a benediction. The psyche acknowledging that the center has shifted. He is no longer the axis of her life, but a fading figure in its periphery. And in the space left by his absence, something unexpected emerges. Expansion. For years her awareness was narrowed, consumed by the task of decoding his moods, anticipating his storms, soothing his hunger. Now that energy returns to her, and it is vast. The silence that once felt foreign becomes fertile. She begins to hear a new voice rising within, not the voice of fear or compulsion, but the voice of the self. Steady, patient, luminous. Relationships shift as well. She no longer enters them to fill a void, nor to rescue, nor to be rescued. She enters them as exchange, as play, as meeting between sovereigns. Where once you were drowned in the needs of others, she now breathes freely, offering without depletion, receiving without debt. Compassion becomes clearer, sharper, no longer blind sacrifice, but radiant presence. The narcissist may still appear at the edges of her life, circling like a shadow desperate for light. He may attempt to rekindle the old script, weaving gestures of apology or sudden storms of rage. But she is no longer bound. His words fall into silence that does not answer. His hooks strike against smooth stone. She sees, she understands, she does not engage. Her clarity is her shield, her silence her crown. And here lies the paradox. What was once torment has become teacher. The narcissist, without intending it, delivered her into individuation. His mask forced her to recognize her own. His hunger exposed her wound of self-denial. His abyss reflected her abyss. In resisting his illusions, she learned to dissolve her own. The one who sought to diminish her became, unwillingly, the midwife of her wholeness. This is why the expansion is quiet. There is no need for proclamation, no need for revenge, no need for triumphal banners. The empath, now sovereign, walks with a different rhythm, lighter, steadier, truer. She does not need to prove her strength, for it is woven into her being. She does not need to heal every wound she sees, for she knows the path of healing belongs to each soul alone. She does not need to fear the abyss, for she has looked into it and returned. The last echoes fade. The silence remains. But in that silence there is music. The music of a life reclaimed, of boundaries honored, of present expanded. It is the song of one who has walked through the labyrinth, faced the masks, learned the shadow's tongue, and emerged not corrupted but whole. And so the empath stands at the threshold of her own horizon. The theater of illusions is behind her. Before her lies the open field, the vast sky, the path of becoming. She steps forward, not as mirror, not as mask, but as self, sovereign, unbound, infinite in possibility. The dream returns, but it has changed. Once the empath saw herself wandering through labyrinths of mirrors, pursued by shifting faces. Now she dreams of a birdcage. The bars are thin, delicate, almost ornamental. So fragile, she wonders why she never tried to bend them before. And inside, she sees not herself, but a bird she has carried all her life. Restless, bright-eyed, beating its wings against invisible glass. The cage door is ajar. It always was. She had believed it locked because fear told her so. Fear whispered that beyond the cage was annihilation, that to step into freedom was to risk abandonment, chaos, death. But now she knows. The true death is to remain caged, mistaking servitude for love. The bird lifts into the air, and as it rises, she feels her own chest expand. This is not escape, it is return. Return to the wide sky of being, to the horizon that no tyrant, no wound, no illusion can confine. She understands now what Nietzsche meant when he placed a child after the lion. Freedom is not merely saying no. It is discovering the innocence to say yes. Yes to play, yes to creation, yes to the world unshackled by fear. And here, in the archetypal rhythm of myth, comes the moment Joseph Campbell named the return with the elixir. For every descent into shadow, every confrontation with the abyss, every dismantling of illusion is incomplete until what is learned is brought back to life itself. The empath does not emerge merely for herself. She emerges bearing a gift. What is this elixir? Not knowledge of how to manipulate, not secret power over others, but that is poison disguised as medicine. The true elixir is clarity, the ability to see without being deceived, to love without being enslaved, to hold shadow and light in the same gaze. This clarity, once carried back into the world, becomes medicine for more than one soul, for in her presence, others feel permission to step out of their own cages. Her silence, her boundaries, her luminous steadiness are not weapons but invitations. The narcissist, sensing her freedom, may rage, may plead, may vanish into deeper fortresses. But none of this matters now, for she has realized that her path no longer bends around his orbit. He was never the destination, only the threshold. The true journey is inward and outward at once, into the depths of her own shadow, and outward into the vast open field of becoming. And so the bird soars higher, carrying the elixir in its wings, the secret of sovereignty, the song of one who has walked through masks and emerged as self. The empath, now sovereign, returns not as victim, not as healer bound to others' wounds, but as bearer of the elixir, the lived truth that freedom is possible, that wholeness is not an illusion, that the abyss can be faced and survived. This is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new one. For when the birdcage opens, the sky itself becomes a page upon which the soul writes. Every empire ends, not with conquest, but with forgetting. The narcissist, once a towering presence, becomes a fading silhouette on the horizon of the empath's soul. His voice, once thunder, dissolves into murmur. His gestures, once spells, dissolve into dust. He does not vanish because he has been defeated. He vanishes because he is no longer needed. For years, the empath's inner world revolved around him. She scanned his moods as sailors scan the weather. She shaped herself to his storms. She bent her will to appease his hunger. He was the axis, and she the wheel turning endlessly around him. But now, the axis has collapsed. The wheel lies still. The stage where he performed has grown barren. And here something wondrous happens. Into clear ground of her psyche rises a new world. At first it feels foreign, even frightening. The silence of absence, the vastness where once every corner was filled by his presence. But gradually she perceives that this emptiness is not void but space. Space in which to breathe. Space in which to create. Space in which her own voice, long silence, begins to speak. This voice is unfamiliar. It does not beg, does not plead, does not negotiate. It speaks with the steady cadence of the self. It says, "You are whole. You are whole even when you believe yourself broken. You are not the echo of another's hunger. You are the source of your own song." The narcissist, sensing this shift, may try to reassert himself. He may appear again with sudden sweetness, with promises of change, with storms of accusation. But each attempt falls flat. His words are like coins from a dead kingdom, once currency, now worthless metal. The empath recognizes them for what they are, not revelation, not transformation, but repetition. And repetition, once seen, loses its power. Thus he fades, not in a single dramatic vanishing, but like mist dissolving under the sun. The more she roots herself in her own presence, the less room there is for his shadow. He does not leave. He is outgrown. And what is born in his place? The world within. It is not a fortress, not a stage, but a garden. Here, dreams return not as warnings, but as invitations. She dreams of open fields, of rivers flowing without dams, of doors leading not into labyrinths, but into wide horizons. She begins to sense the archetypal child stirring again within her. Not the wounded child of abandonment, but the eternal child of creation. This child laughs where once she wept. She plays where once she obeyed. She creates where once she only endured. In her laughter there is no trace of mockery, only innocence restored. This is the miracle of individuation. The wound that nearly destroyed her becomes the womb of her rebirth. The narcissist is gone, not because he was conquered, but because she has stepped into a realm where his language no longer reaches. His drama is written in a tongue she now understands, but no longer needs to speak. She has returned to her own alphabet, her own song, her own world. Thus the vanishing is not tragedy, but liberation. The stage is empty, and in that emptiness a universe begins. When Nietzsche spoke of the child as the last metamorphosis of the spirit, he meant not regression, but renewal. The child is not a return to naivete, but the arrival of innocence after knowledge, of play after ordeal, of creation after destruction. The empath, having passed through the camel of burdens and the lion of defiance, now awakens as a child, not wounded, not armored, but free. The eternal child dances where others march. She laughs where others scheme. She invents where others repeat. For her, the world is no longer a battlefield of domination, nor a theater of manipulation. It is a field of play, vast and open, where each moment is an opportunity to create rather than to endure. She no longer wears the mask of the martyr, nor the mask of the savior. She does not need to. Masks belong to those who fear exposure, who seek control. But she has walked through both the glitter of the narcissist's mask and the shadows of her own. Having faced them, she no longer needs disguise. Her face is her own. Her voice is her own. Her life is her own. The narcissist, that ancient trickster, is not erased from the universe. He remains, as all shadows do. But he is no longer a tyrant in her psyche, no longer the axis of her being. He is simply a figure among others, a reminder of what happens when a child is abandoned. To encounter him again would not be to re-enter the cage, but to see a mask and smile at its fragility. She does not hate him. She does not worship him. She does not need him. He is a chapter, not the book. And so she lives in a new rhythm. Her compassion remains, but it is no longer compulsive. Her love remains, but it is no longer blind. Her boundaries remain, but they are no longer fortresses. They are rivers, flowing and alive. She had become sovereign, but sovereignty here does not mean isolation. It means the capacity to meet others as equals, not as rescuer or victim, but as co-creators in the dance of existence. This is a dance beyond masks, a dance of two beings who need not disguise their wounds, nor wield them as weapons. A dance where intimacy is no longer extraction, but exchange. A dance where freedom is not solitude, but presence shared without fear. The eternal child within her does not ask, "Will you stay? Will you love me? Will you save me?" The child asks only, "Shall we play?" And this play is not frivolous. It is sacred, for it is only in play that true creation arises. Only in innocence that true strength reveals itself. Thus the story closes not with conquest, nor with revenge, but with renewal. The empath, who once thought herself broken, has discovered herself whole. She has gazed into the abyss and returned with clarity. She has carried the elixir of sovereignty back into her life, and she has become the child again, eternal, playful, creative. The predator's smile fades, the all-seeing eye remains, but it is no longer an eye of vigilance. It is an eye of vision, an eye that sees the world not as trap or theater, but as horizon, and upon that horizon, the eternal child dances, beyond masks, beyond wounds, beyond the drama of power. She dances, and in her dance the world itself is remade.